Welcome to Innovations in Education. I'm your host, David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly. And on this show, we bring guests every single episode who have made things work in public education. This show is about the innovators. This show is about the folks who are solving problems. This show is about making things work in education. Now, there's a lot of shows out there talking about what's wrong in the education systems, and those are great shows. There's some shows talking about what we're not doing well, and there's a lot to learn from those, but that's not this show. This show is going to be featuring educators who are making things work for young people and improving public education. Welcome to this month's episode of Innovations in Education with David Adams. I'm your host, David Adams, CEO of the Urban Assembly, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jonah Shanker and Mr. Peter Harris. Jonah is the district superintendent and Peter is the assistant superintendent for Ulster BOCES. Now, the Ulster BOCES provides educational leadership and support, along with more than 200 innovative and cost-effective programs and services to help meet the 8 public school districts in Ulster County meet their academic, administration, and operational goals. Their goals are to make sure that programs benefit students, educators, employers, and taxpayers throughout Ulster County. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, David. Nice to be in space with you today.
Well, before we get started, where is Ulster County and what is a BOCES?
I'll kick us off with the quick overview of what a BOCES is. Ulster County, New York. We are about halfway between New York City and Albany in the Hudson Valley. Beautiful. You know, you want to get some real specifics, we'll turn it over to our historian of Ulster County, Peter Harris. But the Board of Cooperative Educational Services, that is a BOCES. We are an educational service agency. There are 37 BOCES in New York. And really at the core, we are about shared services. We're about efficiency. We're about economics, ensuring that all districts, regardless of their size or who they have in terms of staff, can provide robust services, access to students, and our services expand into professional learning, technology support, business office support, and then our direct student-based programs, of which Peter oversees a bunch. So 37 of us. My role as district superintendent is to work as the CEO of our BOCES, but also as a direct report to the commissioner. So myself, and then in turn, the assistant superintendents and our staff are extensions to the New York State Education Department. It's the way in New York that we roll out and ensure districts are moving forward through initiatives, change, transformation in a state that has, 700 plus districts with their own superintendents and board of education. So we're a complex animal, and the state incentivizes this shared services through BOCES aid. So when 2 or more districts are sharing services through a BOCES, it becomes very cost effective to access programming, services, technology, and things of that sort. So that's a little bit who we are. And then, great work in our programs. And I know today we're going to really dig into some of the programs that Peter and team oversee.
We sure are, but let's go over to Peter and get your sense. I understand you are the historian of the Ulster County, Hudson County region. What history should I know? And what can you share with our listeners?
Well, I guess I will say, since Jonah put it that way, I have 52 years now. I had a birthday last week.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. Of experience in Ulster County my entire life. I'm an Ulster County boy, just like Jonah. But I will say, since you asked where is Ulster County and what is Ulster County, we're about 90 miles north of Manhattan. Okay. We are on the west side of the Hudson River. And for those of you that watch Law and Order or other TV shows, you might have heard of Poughkeepsie. So that's where Metro North kind of lets out commuters or weekenders. And that's just across the river in Dutchess County from us.
Great. So I actually want to, before we get into the specifics around how you guys are thinking about innovations in public education, I do want to sit Jonah and Pete with this idea of a BOCES a little bit longer. We talked about this idea of sharing educational services. Jonah, what are you the superintendent of? Are you the superintendent of 200 innovative, cost-effective programs? Are you superintendent of the superintendents who use your services? Talk me through that a little bit more. What is your authority and how do the BOCES help translate state priorities into district initiatives?
Yeah, so it's complex. To kind of directly under my leadership is everything in our BOCES programming. So those 200 plus services that you talked about. I'm the superintendent or the CEO of the BOCES. We have an 11-member board that I work for. And then in turn, everybody else kind of works for me in this vision and mission.
Including you, Peter.
That's
Right.
correct.
Not for, but in partnership. And that's important. We'll talk about that. And then as my work as an arm of the state and for the commissioner, I am a regional leader, but I do not have authority over our 8 districts. And so it really is about creating experiences, dialogue, and questions for 8 superintendents to think about what they are doing with their unique systems, how we are thinking about growing together, and more recently, really about regionally, how can we move from thinking just about the district that a superintendent works in to regionally to ensure that every single student has a pathway, that the net is cohesive, that students aren't falling through. And really in that is where the BOCES student-based programs come in. It's not viable for the 8 districts all to have career and technical education, specialized special education, adult education, early college, high schools. And so we become extensions to their programs to really kind of create that robust net.
And does the funding model come from the districts itself through a tax levy from the state? How is that relationship organized vis-a-vis how you guys are funded?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We have no taxing authority. So all of our budget is driven through services that the districts subscribe to. So each year we are talking about new services, existing services, what are gaps, and the districts are subscribing to us across the variety of those 200 plus services. Those are tuitioned or what we call COSER based, and that in turn drives our budgets and our staffing, et cetera.
And the last question, as we're thinking about this big idea of what a BOCES is and what it does, what's the relationship of a BOCES and innovation in public education?
My favorite question, but I'll turn it over to Peter first to take a jump at that one.
So first and foremost, the opportunity that we get to work with the kids from Ulster County, just give another context as the historian, there's about 185,000 people in Ulster County, a little over 20,000 of which are K-12 students in 8 districts. And at our CTE center, we have nearly 1,300 juniors and seniors on a daily basis participating in 21 state-approved CTE classes. And so when I dive into this, I'm going to get at the core of what we call our North Star, which is the way in which we activate our instructional programs in making sure that kids have the opportunity to work on their unique selves, develop their individual capacity, contribute to community, and do so through continuous cycles of inquiry. So that's what makes us tick and unique. Now, how do we innovate? Well, we work on operationalizing that North Star through crew community structures and practices, which I'm sure we'll talk about during this conversation. You'd be familiar with that as the work that we know through EL education. So that's at the core of what we do and how we do it. Yes, that's correct. And then our process and project-based learning approach also that we deepen in our work through Buck Institute, PBL Works, and our partners at High Tech High in San Diego. And we have our own spin on that as well. So we believe that in this space that is provided for us by our component districts, we lead by example, and we hope that others can follow along this model as we augment what our local component districts are able to do within their spaces. So we think we can make a lighthouse program for others to see, and we are currently doing it through our special education programs, through our career and technical education programs, but for the way in which we really activate learning for all.
So it kind of sounds like you guys sit at this edge of innovation vis-a-vis being out and about. I heard you talk about High Tech High over in San Diego, PBL, Knowledge Works, all of these national organizations, and help translate some of those trends into problem sets that may be facing your superintendents in Ulster County. How well did I get that?
Pretty well.
Yeah, and I would just add to Peter all of that. And Peter said something at the end, which is critical. All learners, right? So this is our belief, not just for what we intend and hope for to see in the interaction between a teacher and a student in a classroom, but for all learners, inclusive of our staff, adult learners, and the spaces that we hold for the folks who come to us, monthly meetings, our professional learning. We collectively believe that our current model, the industrial model of education, has systematic and foundational components which are not about promoting relationships and access and equity and pathways, and we can go down the list of all the things. And so often we look at initiatives that attempt to push that, and they're laid on top of that foundation as veneer, and we don't get any shift and change. And so we believe that there are several moves that, as we think about all of this work, that until we change some of those foundational elements, we'll be right back here next year, 3 years, or 10 years, having the same conversations. And it really is what I think has brought together our current leadership team from central down to our building level. Folks who are coming to work with us now, or who have grown up in the agency, have stayed because they believe deeply in this work. And we've had a previous district superintendent who kind of gave us the opportunity and kind of picked our heads up and said, y'all, some of these folks around the world and around the country have been at this a lot longer than us, and we need to go see them, and we need to be in space with them and kind of open the aperture to what you pointed out, which are these partners who, we're not trying to be them, but they've already traveled this path. And so we don't want to be trying to avoid some of the pitfalls. But Peter also talked about making this our own way for our own unique communities and offering that same kind of context to the folks who we have the privilege of working with directly, who see our programs, and through our professional learning arm, which is called Educator Edge.
Okay, so this sounds like a little bit of the design philosophy that you use to inform IPAR 87. Tell me a little bit about what IPAR 87 is, what problems you're designing it to solve, and how you anticipate it will solve these problems for current and future students in Ulster County.
So that's a big umbrella. I guess I'll start off first with, formally about a decade's worth of engagement and conversation around economic and workforce development. And that was really through, my step into the world through our P-Tech program, Pathways in Technology, Early College, High School, 6-year program that we started, that Peter in turn had an opportunity to lead as building principal after me and some of the other folks on our team as well. And really the realization that I was engaged in this conversation, this cyclical conversation, amazing people working really hard, but the results weren't producing a shift in economic and workforce development around kind of the skills workforce gap, around pipelines, around synergy and connectivity.
How did you know? How did you know that the results were producing those outcomes?
Well, we still have shortages, and we still have the narrative, kind of not just in Ulster County, but the preparation of students upskilled to be able to enter into jobs today and prepared for tomorrow is still live and real. And a couple of things I think happened. Number one, I always talk about the conversation was about an adult problem, right? Like all post-secondary, community college and county government and workforce development. And we began to talk about this in relation to something that Peter and I've talked about for a long time, which is like kind of the stigma of BOCES, right? And if we want to change economic and workforce development, then we need to root this conversation in the 20,000 students and their families, where the narrative shifts is at dining room tables, at home with school-aged children. And we were trying to build this tree kind of 30 feet above the ground without tending to the roots from really a systems level. And we can get into kind of the other components as we move down closer to like, what is IPAR? But really leveraging two things. One, K-12 as the foundation for this in shifting the narrative. And number two, allowing BOCES, not just to be a BOCES thing, but really do what BOCES are intended to do, which is kind of single point entry, the synergy and efficiency and nexus between like school and private sector, whether it's community partner, work partner, et cetera. And in that, really allowing then us to help support the 2-year college entry point, the adult ed work entry point, the 4-year college entry point. Like, we're not trying to make it a BOCES thing, but build just this one construct that everybody understands rather than 4 or 5 different siloed attempts at this work. And so it's really not a human change. I always talk about it as like the container needs to shift. We just have people that aren't pulling in the same direction. And I believe that IPAR represents the beginning to what this actually looks like through proximity, through programming, through design. So, I'll turn it over to Peter to talk a little bit about the kind of school end and the model that's behind this.
Thank you. I heard economic and workforce development. I heard shortages at the skill workforce area. I heard stigma with regard to the CTE. I heard a lack of cohesion to your 40-year degree. What's the solution? What is IPARC?
IPARC is, I'm calling it an agglomeration project.
Agglomeration. Did I get that?
You did get that. And
Okay.
so that basically means bringing together and connecting resources for the betterment of all. So who will Ulster BOCES be in this IPARC 87 design? Well, the hope and goal is that we're the workforce developers for the campus and for the county through our work in CTE and adult education. And we do that in a range of, approved programs already, whether it's through aviation studies, culinary, hospitality, healthcare services, finance, criminal justice and law, plant animal science. I can go on, right? So what will start to happen is that on this campus and in this county, we can be seen as labor gap fillers as well, right? So this project is focused on the CTE experience, which is in New York State. That model is 11th and 12th grade for half day. But that's 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., right? So these labs will be agile and useful for adult and community education in the evenings and afternoon to be a part of workforce development, which is economic development. And I think the way in which we optimally are building this, Jonah harkened back to our leadership a decade ago and a handoff that we had. What we learned through early college, high school planning and development is that if you have a three-legged stool, which is higher education, industry partners, and the K-12 folks, you have a robust model that can project out where skilled workforce is needed and how to plan for that, right? And so it doesn't mean only towards a specific skill set for a specific trade, but we also are invested in making sure that everyone who comes through our programs as a learner has an opportunity to learn personal skill development, professional skill, workforce development, and the technical piece. Again, it's another three-legged stool.
Mhm.
It falls without one of those legs. You got to have personal, professional, and technical skill development. And we hope that those personal and professional skills that we trained here on this campus, IPARC 87, as a concept, are ones that are translatable, or as Jonah spoke about when he was first founding that early college high school, they're transversal, right? You can commute and bring them with you, migrate with them throughout your careers in life and throughout your experiences in your personal space as well. And, just as a vision or a dream, I remember a close friend of mine went on vacation with his family and came back. He's like, we went to the coolest place with our kids. It was called Diversity.
Diversity.
He said it was sponsored by all of the local banks and businesses. And you went into this place and the kids had a little passport and they could see all the jobs in the community and think about how that might be something they might want to do. And so in the end, I want this IPARC 87 project, yes, to be workforce and economic development, but I want it to be a place where people can come here, see themselves in the space, think about what they're good at, what they value, what value they're going to bring to their community, and see what they could be.
Well, Peter, I want to ground this a little bit better because I know you guys have been doing CTE for a good amount of time. When we saw each other in Denver, we had talked about CTE work. I remember that Stiff when the P-Tech work had been coming out, but this seemed like a different approach. I heard you talk about 11th and 12th grade for half a day versus a coherent conglomeration project where students from across the range have an opportunity to develop their workforce, personal and professional skills. I want us to land this for our listeners here. How does this differ from our current state vis-a-vis workforce development, Ulster County, and maybe across the country? What is it about this work that really differentiates it as innovation in public education?
I'll take it first. Okay. So for me, what differentiates this is that we are, and I don't think this should be a differentiator. It's my experience that it is. We're bringing to the table our industry partner. We're looking at workforce and economic development data. We're attempting to partner as deeply as possible with our higher ed folks. And we're listening to what they all say, and we will be listening to what they all say is necessary and needed in these spaces so that we are creating a model that is going to provide the skill sets that are necessary to experience joy and be employable here in Ulster County in the Hudson Valley. I hope that it means that we vitalize our economy and our culture so that I can grandparent here. That should be a goal always, but that is definitely a goal. I'll turn it to Jonah.
This is about community revitalization. The former IBM site, there's been several attempts to kind of rehabilitate.
My grandfather worked at IBM.
Yeah. I don't know that you can really go anywhere in Ulster County or proximate and have a conversation with somebody who's been there for some time without having that story, right? Like my grandparents, my parents, we moved here. And so there's this legacy of failure in this particular property. So just the sheer fact to kind of breathe life back into this property from a development standpoint is huge. It's long overdue, and that success will bring success. I'm glad that Peter's ready to grandfather. I am not yet, but that's okay.
I am grandparent here. That's
right.
Jonah.
Right. But what we're also talking about is this idea of like school work and then like equity work, and they're not separate, right? This is equity work. This is belonging work when our students have the opportunity to know that through Ulster County, through IPAR, that they'll be able to be connected to jobs that are not low churn and low wage, where they will be able to be homeowners, where they can see themselves with a future right here in the community. That's the most powerful belonging work, right? And it's not just BOCES, right? This is by nature an extension of our 8 districts who have come on board to create this in partnerships with the amazing stuff that they're already doing. So I think that's really what this is about. It's also about, as we would talk about, kind of curating the process so that we can replicate this out, because we are certainly not the only community that can benefit from when we project forward a couple years and county government, their innovation, economic and workforce development, 2 and 4 year SUNYs, us, our students, industry, we have housing within this ecosystem. That's a model that says we have a community that is vested in the future of our county and communities. And I'll end it with saying, I think the current environment that we're doing this is also really important to highlight, right? Like we know that it's unstable, that the current economic landscape is difficult. And this speaks to 2 different ways to kind of go at current environment, where we kind of recede into our own silos to perpetuate whatever inertia has been happening, or we look at as an opportunity actually to co-create and share in a way that's economically feasible to move forward and design new, because it's actually the best conditions we currently have for innovation, right? Stem from that edge of instability, but confidence and vision, all rooted in relationships. So I don't want to minimize kind of the landscape in which we are moving this forward as an invitation to others to say, no, now's the time. Now's the time to do this type of work.
Well, Jonah and Peter, I want to bring us to a question around why now. And Jonah, you had mentioned that there has been a mismatch between what we've been producing in the educational space and the labor market expectations and requirements for a little bit of time now. So the first question I have is, how and why has that mismatch persisted? And what are you guys thinking about in terms of partnerships or conglomerates to address that partnership? So either Peter or Jonah, why are we in this current state, and how do we solve for this current state now?
So I'll kick off with just the kind of overview and turn it over to Peter for partnerships. First of all, I do not believe that there are isolated skill sets anymore to be successful in whatever is next. This idea of like skills for jobs or skills for academic, like, no. We know that there is a set of skills that are required for students. And I'm not even saying students to be successful in their future anymore. I'm actually talking about it in regards to students having the skills to actually be the designers of a new future, because I'm not sure we did our due diligence in providing them a healthy world to inhabit. And so hopeful that they will be designers of a new future. With that said, no matter whether you ask an industry partner, a mom and pop shop that's doing machining, a large corporation, colleges, like, what do you really want to see when these students enter whatever it is, a job, a walk through the thresholds of your doors? Like, we hear the same thing, no matter where you ask this question, in this state, in this country, in this world. There's different versions of it, but it's that transversal skill set. Simultaneously in New York, they're talking about new graduation requirements and
The Blue Ribbon Commission.
right. And the portrait of a grad, which is a version of those skill sets. And that's what we need to be preparing students for. And there's some instructional shifts that we've talked about that Peter alluded to in our process-based, project-based learning, which is really, again, that really grounds I think the instructional shifts to move out of a model, kind of getting to your question, which wasn't about preparing those students with those skill sets. It was a system designed really well for compliance, for ranking and sorting students, for a different age of information, right? Just information transmission from teacher as knowledge to student as absorber. And we have a different landscape here. So those are some of those structures that we need to change. As Peter kind of digs in and starts talking about partners, it's really rooted in some more of Ron Berger's work, which is really about hierarchy of audience and engagement.
Yeah, so that's it. And I'll go right to the student experience, to the learner experience. The best model that we have is the one in which one of our community or industry partners comes in and gives a real world problem that they need solving and lays it out kind of at the feet and the minds of the kids, who then we help process through a response to the problem and then present it back to that partner so that they can see the intellectual property, can see the solutions, can respond to them, and give feedback to those who have created that. So that's the optimal model, is these work-based learning challenges in a career and technical education center where the kids can get a problem that becomes a project that is real and relevant so that they can learn the personal, professional, and perhaps technical skills as well. I mean, hopefully, right? But again, as we've been talking about, those transversal skill sets of, being able to speak back to an audience, being able to deliver a message, or the way in which we talk about it when we're thinking about making people or training ourselves to be globally competent or global citizens. How do we recognize perspectives of others as we're investigating a problem or investigating a question or something we're curious about? And then how
We
do
don't
we
even need
communicate?
we don't even need global citizens for that, right? We could just be, to your point, a place I'd want a grandfather in would be a place where our young people can identify the perspective of others in pursuit of problem solving in the social and technical space.
100%. So that term global doesn't necessarily mean around the world. It just means broadly, right? Investigating the perspectives of a customer, of a client, of the owner, the operator, a peer, somebody that you're in community with on Saturdays or Sundays, but being able to think about what their need and perspective is and how we then, communicate what we've found and then how that's actionable or worthwhile so that we can, it goes back to what we talk about, a continuous cycle of inquiry, right? So that model of investigation, perspective taking, communicating, and acting is a big piece of what we think needs to happen, because when you're communicating and acting, you give people the opportunity to give you feedback. When you get feedback, you give yourself the opportunity to reflect. And when you can get into that cycle, that's where human development happens.
I want to sit with this for a little bit, because I think if we were to go to parents and say, we want to ensure that every young person in the urban assembly, for example, graduates ready to take perspectives, understand themselves and others, solve problems both technically and socially, our parents would be like, yes, I want to organize a school around that. But there has been some pushback and resistance to a shift toward career-centered learning as a way from, say, traditional academic standards. Some folks are wary of a shift towards career technical education as a left-hand version of the academic pursuit. So how are we responding to our parents or community members who are saying SAT or BUT, you want less than for my child, you're trying to track my child into a space that not all students should have the largest opportunity to achieve. So speak back to me on some of those concerns and criticisms around career technical education that is less than in terms of traditional academic path.
So I think a response one from me is that stigma around a vocational model is one from 150 years ago and is very much the standard and traditional American educational system, where we are learned to be in an assembly line fashion. It's just that normally those are rows of desks now, right? And so we're accustomed to that. And we often look to recreate for those we serve for not paying attention and reflecting what was created for us. And so, Jonah spoke about this before. I'll dig a little more deeply. That monopolistic approach to the American educational system was great for economic and war dominance of another time. That's not how industry or products are made today. Right? Things are different today. And when I think about just what an assembly line is, putting together products to make an end versus teaching kids reductive and additive manufacturing principles in those same types of spaces, what I will say is, because we're approaching it in that way, teaching conceptual rather than simply task work in our spaces, we are getting all demography requesting seats into our career and technical education spaces.
That's what I got from Ohio, by the way, when I was working over with Montgomery County. Their current technical education placements in terms of rates for seats are way higher than the supply is. I just wanted to, not just you guys in terms of that.
That's countrywide.
Yeah. So next year we have already 1,450 seat requests out of 3,150 juniors and seniors.
Mm.
And so we're going to place as many of those folks as we can into the classes. And I think that there's a bunch of reasons. And whether it's the debt that a college education will cost you these days, or the amount of time to pay that back, or the truth and the fact that kids are coming out with debt and are underemployed and can't meet those payments, or we're finding out that the skilled trades actually pay quite well.
We just had a strike on NJ Transit, no joke. They were arguing that they wanted the average salary of an engineer for NJ Transit to go from 130 to 170. And I had some thoughts about that. So not bad thoughts, just thoughts.
Yeah. Let me give Jonah a chance, because I could talk about this one for a couple hours.
I'm going to kind of slide away from the career and tech side of the house back to your question about the traditional space. Just, I think it's also important to highlight that those increased numbers nationwide are also despite declining enrollments in general in most communities. So I get declining enrollment, but increased enrollment in career and technical education. And that's a whole other segment to kind of probably probe at, like, well, what's going on there? So I often kind of open this dialogue or conversation with, I think you said SAT or bust. I've had a lot of different job interviews in my kind of adult working career, and to date have not been asked, what I got on my chemistry regents or my earth science regents or what my SAT scores were. And so I think what we're talking about here is career and technical education, and particularly the model of instructional practice that Peter spoke about, with the engagement of that outside audience that drives iterative design and reflection, tuning, celebrations of learning at the end, is no different than the shifts that we need to see in our traditional spaces. I don't advocate that our students don't need a general knowledge base to understand science principles and have an understanding of history and the context, as long as it's the right history that they're studying, or the real history, I would say.
I was going to ask about that in 10 seconds.
Well, not all of our textbooks, I think, portray the accuracies of what has happened. But again, another topic. And so I'm a deep advocate for literacy as a human right. And that's formal literacy and multiple literacies around foundational algebra principles. We know that to be a gatekeeper for a lot of higher learning. But these shifts that we're talking about, and we often, Peter and I have kind of talked about this, these shifts are around engagement, about relevancy, about joy, about tapping into the most innate qualities of learning that we've undone through an outdated model of school. And so, we can take tests, we can take the SATs, but those are low-lying fruit, actually. When we begin to engage students in this way, they are well above, they are engaged, and we can catch all of that other stuff, but we are producing what we would call good humans, right? Like this is the work around growing good humans. And you don't do that in rows through basic transformation of information and spitting that back. You do it through deep relationships and connection and reflection. And so you can still write that traditional essay. You can still give that quiz, but foundationally, we have to really talk about what our priorities are in school. And I'll just close with, when we have the opportunity to work with building principals, and I'll go to high school or other leaders, and they talk about, wanting to build systems that, that kids are connected and they're ready for jobs of the future. Like Peter brought in, like the vision mission check, and he can talk about what that is. But I often say the first thing is, well, let me see your budget and let me see your master schedule, because those are moral documents. Those are your statement of values. And if the things that Peter was describing don't show up with as much weight as traditional content, then you're not going to get that. And you certainly don't value that. Collectively, that is the belief system that's driving, I think, the changes that we get to enact at BOCES, to be that lighthouse to show people, hey, take a look at how we think and do this work here.
I do want to follow up on that because, how do we destigmatize and how do we invite more people in? We open the doors, we shed the light on what it is we're doing. And I think that also is something that makes us currently unique, is that we want to accept the challenge of articulating what and why we're doing what we're doing on behalf of our learners. And so that we're celebrating the learning, we're presenting it as often as we can, whether it's through conversations such as this as to who we are as leaders, or inviting folks in to see what our kids are up to in their career and technical education spaces and in their specialized programming. And, I think about a tour that I had today with our friend Torrance Hampton, who was talking to our kids about how to make their passion their paycheck, through his genius factor approach, right? And always encouraging our learners to be ready to present to those audiences, to be able to articulate what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they go about that. It destigmatizes locally. And then when people from outside can see the what, the why, and the how, they start to speak about it. And we get people knocking on our door asking, can I be a part of it? Retirees from field saying, maybe I want to be a CTE teacher. I heard about the cool things that you're doing. And that is a buzz that's happening.
Sourcing CTE teachers, always a challenge. I know it personally.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
when I think about the math, though, I do want to kind of speak about Jonah's truth about algebra and college going, sophomore retention. There's a difference, though, when you teach the kids or when they're allowed to learn 3D printing and metal milling, and they start to understand beyond the X and Y axis, and they go X, Y, Z. Then you take them to another machine, they do X, Y, Z, A, B, and they start to explain to you 360 rotations of metal milling. It's highly complex conceptually, and kids can. And when they get the opportunity to make something that's three-dimensional with cool machinery, man, it excites them. And I'm just in awe of what they can then do. Kids who would not have been given a chance for higher levels of math, that then get an opportunity to express it, explain it, and show their art.
All right, Peter, I got two things for you to follow up on this question, because I think there's some interesting ideas I want to elevate. I've been to some places where they have worked on the stigmatization of CTE by pursuing aggressive entrance requirements to the programs for VOTAC or CTE. So that exclusivity tells parents that this is something that not all kids should be available to, but that it's a good quality thing for their kids. And so they start to tout. I was looking at, I think, New Jersey, the top 3 or 4 schools in New Jersey are actually VOTAC programs, which is a little complicated because of their entrance requirements to get in, means that the schools are more likely to be proficient on the outcome. And then the other thing I want to raise here is that I think we've all been aware of this kind of college going gap between boys and girls. And oftentimes CTE has been elevated as a way, to your point, Pete, to create more hands-on and relevant versions of learning so that they're more accessible to boys who tend to have more challenges in terms of academic outcomes, in terms of FATs, college going, et cetera. So let's just tackle these two ideas. First, number one, exclusivity as a solution for access to CTE programs. And number two, CTE as a solution for encouraging engagement, particularly chronic absenteeism, et cetera, for our boys, and particularly boys of color in our communities.
So I think I'll say raise all boats is the first thing. So CTE for all. All kids need access to relevant, real, credible, hands-on, all learners, but they also then need access to people who can give them high quality, targeted, interesting, and accessible feedback. And so when I think about healthcare education and who's needed in healthcare, everyone who's interested in caring for someone is needed in healthcare. How far can a person go in healthcare? As far as they're curious enough to learn, as far as they can be mentored into the space, right? So that's not the way we're approaching it at Ulster BOCES, is to make it exclusive so that we put a higher premium on the experience. It's the opposite. It's like,
Act now. Time is running out.
yeah, let's get you in the door as quickly as possible so that you can begin your learning journey as quickly as possible so you can become the most that you see or that someone else sees in you in that career field or in that trade area, or so that you can find skills to migrate somewhere that you do see a way that you can take what you love, you're interested in, and that find a way to make value in the community through your skill sets. We all need to be able to do that. We have to see ourselves and we have to create dignity in these spaces. And Jonah mentioned it before, Ron Berger's hierarchy of audience is what we need to do. It pulls people along in their own reflective and learning process. And then we mentor and support. It's not carrot and stick, it's mentor support. That's the first and foremost that I would say about that.
Let's throw over to Jonah. We're talking about the gender achievement gap, which is, I think, driven some federal policy, to a lesser extent, some state policy. But oftentimes, career-connected education is kind of like the implicit, let's get some boys to economic and social mobility, frankly.
When you look at our 1,200 plus students, our attendance rates, our graduation rates, our students who are in career and technical education, half day, junior, senior, the percentage of those students going on to post-secondary 2 or 4-year colleges and direct into the workforce, right? It works. But I think what we're talking about here, and full disclosure, you're talking to 2 leaders who had, there's quotes around this, college-going students who did multiple years in career and technical education and then on to 4-year college. Peter's got a graduate. I've got a junior in college. And what we're talking about here is an engagement issue. And so I think about this idea in a recent podcast that Peter shared with me about, like, really it's about the spark. And so if this male population who can get into a career and technical experience, they can feel connected, they can feel seen, they can feel like they have purpose, and that spark is found, well, we know that they are going to be more successful in whatever's next. And so my question becomes, well, why do we wait until junior year in New York? And well, we didn't. We created P-Tech programs and we ignited that spark in rising 8th graders, and nothing was different, right? It ignited, fueled these students to connect and find purpose. And they, but for this program, would probably not be high school completers. Forget about college. So why are we waiting until 8th grade is my next question, because we can all speak to guidance counselors and principals. We can get into 2nd grade classrooms, probably even kindergarten classrooms, and identify the students who we know either by system or by what the data shows us are going to run into engagement barriers through socioeconomic status. Again, what our current system tells us it doesn't work for, but we haven't provided those solutions. And why aren't we changing those so that there's those same career and technical education experiences, if that's the spark? And there's lots of other ones we can go into for that 1st grader. There are community engaged, partner engagement, career and tech engagement style projects that would allow those 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds to find purpose, build relationships, and not begin the story of educational harm that they're going to endure, that we'll then have to try to unpack as a junior in high school. Like, the answers and recipe is there. We just have created a system that's so prohibitive that either perceive we can't or we don't do, but nobody's telling us, there's no law against it, right? And so that's the container that I think junior and senior we're solving for. We've done some solving in 8th grade, and our work is thinking about this system overhaul, which is just always about, no matter who you are, what zip code, ability, disability, race, gender, how you identify, it's about that spark, it's about purpose, and it's about the shifts that will allow, and it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like, when we solve for those furthest from opportunity, to Peter's point, everybody benefits. So career and tech is doing it, and we're focusing it on that. And lastly, Peter talked about, how do we do this? We open our doors. IPAR 87 is a bigger door. We're going to be able to invite more people in. We're going to have a bigger stage to be more public, to not say we have an answer, but come in, share with us what you're doing. Let us show you what we're doing, and let's co-design next together.
I want to follow up on that and just say, I think, David, rather than hard or soft data, I'll just tell a story about what we're doing on the walls of our building this year. If you were to enter our building right now in our vestibule behind the kind of closed doors, you'd walk through and There are placemats, which is a picture of every kid in program with their name and their sending district for each of our 21 programs.
Mm-hmm.
Then as you get into the building, there's one of about 100 faces of our faculty and staff. So our teachers, our lead learners, everybody who's there to make sure that the learning environment can be. When you get further into the building, at the doorway of each one of our classrooms, there are the pictures, names, and sending districts for each of the programs. And then a little bit further in our center corridor, there are huge placemats that are just pictures of every kid from a sending district. And so we are making our data very visible. It's not saying this is our demography. It's saying these are the faces of the people, and these are the names that they call themselves, and these are the places that they come from. And so the first time that I actually walked a mother and her sister, when she said, I'm just not sure if I don't know if I can see my kid in this space. I was told to come check it out. I gave her a visual tour that way of, here are the kids from the districts, here are the kids in the programs, right? And here's the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And man, it really quickly was, oh, I see who's welcome here. As you can see that our county is welcome here, and our county is diverse. As rural or urban as it is in places, we have a diverse population with diverse backgrounds, and it's reflected in our photos and it's reflected in our spaces. And that's the best way that I can tell it, because the hard data still has tragedy within it. But just to see the faces and the individuals and the dignity that they get to have in the spaces, that's the best way.
All right, Jonah, Pete, September 2025 is when you guys get off the ground with this. How will you know that you are pursuing success in terms of your launch and some checkpoints along the way?
Well, Peter and I will both be upright. That's the first indicator, September.
That's right. That's the basics.
The timeline is, we can't wait. We're getting this building open. And again, the move is symbolic, right? This move into the space, this breath of life into this facility. The first indicator is the 1,400 students outside the building, saying to the community, we are the future of Ulster County. Come visit us. That's kind of just holistic welcome. And then we begin to do the work that we're already doing, but the connections become stronger. The convening and the hours in which we're accessible become deeper and longer through day. That three-legged stool and kind of grown out to be more inclusive of partners within those three subsets become more efficient. And ultimately, we are working on some of those larger issues where, not because we say it, but we begin to hear from our partners, wow, this is the future workforce. What are you doing? How can we be included? And then I need to tell this story outward and invite somebody else to see it. I think those are some of the basic indicators. But Peter talked about those photos and hallways. If you want to know if we're successful, you got to come through and talk to kids.
Yeah.
I'll talk to young scholars and young professionals and adults, because I believe they're gonna smile and articulate in ways that you don't always hear in conventional spaces. That's one of my hopes. Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that, Jonah. I think you're spot on. And I would say for me, on the ground floor this summer, when our ambassadors, our young professionals who are helping us get the spaces ready are like, yeah, we're ready, which will happen. And then the next level would be when they're ready to give tours, which won't take them long because they're accustomed to doing it in our current space. So they're excited to articulate into this new space when we talk to them about that. When we have community type events happening, community meetings, project presentations, celebrations of learning happening in our core areas, our forum and our arena. And then when the lights are on at night and those things are happening for adult and community education, and our young professionals from the day are working, mentoring, or facilitating the learning in the evening, which I think they're excited to do as well, then we'll have hit another level. And then the crescendo for me is when our steering committee, our advisory committee, and our foundational support network is telling us what they think we should do next.
And Pete, we can't forget when you can grandparent here as an indicator of success for the work that you guys have been doing. Dr. Jonah Shanker, District Superintendent for Ulster BOCES, Peter Harris, the Assistant Superintendent for Career Pathways for Ulster BOCES. I thank both for being on our show. Thank you for your passion, for your innovation. I look forward to seeing how your work transforms Ulster County in terms of economic and social mobility.
Awesome. Thank you. You got to come visit.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for listening to our latest episode of Innovations in Education, where we bring education leaders who have made things work in the education sector. If you like this episode, please subscribe so that you can hear more great content around innovations in education. I've been your host, David Adams, and have a great day.